A journey to Mars. The astronauts thought Mars was empty until the first night, when someone whispered Ethan's name outside the station. The terrifying part was this: nobody else was supposed to be alive on the planet. Welcome to Learn English Through Stories, the easiest and most enjoyable way to improve your English naturally.
Commander Ethan Cole had spent his entire life dreaming about space. As a child, he would sit on the roof of his family's old apartment building every night, staring at the stars while the city lights flickered below him. The universe looked peaceful from far away, endless, beautiful. But now, floating millions of miles away from Earth, inside the airy spacecraft, Ethan no longer felt wonder. He felt fear. The ship drifted silently through deep space while darkness surrounded it from every direction. No wind, no sound, no life, only silence. Across from Ethan sat Dr. Lena Brooks, the mission scientist. She stared quietly through the thick glass window beside her seat.
"Do you ever think about how small we are?" she asked softly. Marcus Reed, the ship's engineer, laughed nervously. "We're trying not to think about that." But Lena did not smile. Her eyes remained fixed on the endless black void outside. "Sometimes," she whispered, "I feel like space is alive." Nobody answered. The three astronauts had been traveling for almost 6 months. At first, the mission felt exciting. The world called them heroes. News stations followed every update. Children wore toy astronaut helmets while pretending to walk on Mars.
But deep space slowly changes people. Days blurred together. Sleep became difficult. The silence became heavy. Marcus started recording private video messages for his daughter every night before sleeping. Lena barely spoke anymore, and Ethan often woke suddenly in the middle of the night because he thought he heard footsteps moving somewhere inside the ship. The strange part was this: every time he checked the security cameras, nobody was there. Finally, after months of drifting through darkness, Mars appeared before them. The giant red planet floated outside the windows, like a dying world abandoned by time itself.
Dust storms moved slowly across the surface. Massive mountains cast dark shadows across endless deserts. The planet looked ancient, cold, almost haunted. Mission Control celebrated wildly when the landing ship finally touched the surface. "Welcome to Mars," the voice from Earth announced proudly. But when the astronauts stepped outside for the first time, an uncomfortable feeling spread through all three of them. The silence felt wrong. Not peaceful, not natural. Wrong. Their boots pressed into the red dust, while the dark sky stretched endlessly above them. Marcus looked around nervously. "This place gives me bad feelings," he admitted. Ethan forced himself to stay calm. "It's just isolation." But even he did not believe his own words. The crew quickly built the research station and began their mission. During the first few days, everything followed the plan. They collected rock samples. They explored nearby hills. They searched for underground water. But strange things began happening almost immediately. On the third night, the station lights suddenly shut off. Complete darkness swallowed the room. Then Ethan heard breathing beside him. Slow, heavy, human. He grabbed his flashlight instantly. The lights returned 2 seconds later. Nobody stood near him. The next morning, he said nothing about it, because deep down, he feared the truth. He was beginning to lose his mind.
2 days later, Lena discovered footprints outside the station. Fresh footprints. Human footprints. But none of the astronauts had left the station that morning. The tracks stretched toward the distant hills before disappearing completely. Marcus stared at them silently. That's impossible. Nobody disagreed. That night, the crew sat together in the station cafeteria.
Nobody touched their food. The room felt tense. Finally, Marcus spoke. "I think we should report this to Earth." Ethan shook his head immediately. "And tell them what? That ghosts are walking around Mars?" Lena looked toward the dark station window. "What if we're not alone here?" she whispered. The room became silent. Later that night, while the others slept, Ethan sat alone in the control room. The station was quiet, except for the soft sound of machines humming around him. Then, suddenly, the communication system activated by itself. Static filled the speakers. Ethan froze. Then, a weak voice appeared. "Help me." The voice sounded distant, broken, terrified. Ethan quickly activated the recording system. "Who is this?" he demanded. Static crackled loudly. Then the voice returned. "Below the surface." The transmission suddenly ended. Ethan replayed the recording several times. His blood turned cold. Because the voice sounded exactly like his younger brother. The same brother who died 12 years earlier. The next morning, Ethan finally told the others everything. Marcus looked pale. "That's not possible." "I know," Ethan answered quietly. But Lena looked strangely calm. "What if Mars remembers people?" she whispered. Marcus stared at her. "What does that even mean?" Lena slowly looked toward the floor beneath them. "What if something under the planet is listening to us?" That afternoon, the astronauts followed the signal source toward a canyon nearly 20 miles away. The rover crossed endless red valleys while giant dust clouds moved across the horizon. The deeper they traveled, the stranger Mars began to feel. The rocks looked unnatural. The shadows seemed to move. Several times, Marcus thought he saw figures standing far away on top of the hills, but whenever he looked carefully, nothing remained. After hours of driving, the rover finally stopped near the canyon. And there, half buried beneath the dust, stood something impossible. An old metal structure. Rust covered the walls. The windows were shattered, but one faded symbol remained visible. NASA. Marcus stepped backward immediately. "No." Lena stared at the building in shock. "That station looks decades old." According to official history, no human mission had ever reached Mars before them. Yet the structure clearly proved otherwise. The astronauts entered carefully. Their flashlight beams cut through the darkness. Dust floated silently through the abandoned hallways. Inside one room, they found sleeping beds, old coffee cups, family photos, human clothes. It looked like people had once lived there, then vanished. Marcus stopped suddenly. "Did you hear that?" A metallic sound echoed somewhere deep inside the station. Clang, 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 like footsteps. The astronauts slowly followed the sound through the underground hallways. At the end of the corridor stood a control room. Most systems were dead, but one computer still flickered weakly. Ethan activated it.
A video file appeared automatically. Date: October 17th, 2063. Nearly 30 years earlier. Ethan pressed play. A terrified astronaut appeared on the screen. His face looked pale.
Exhausted. Behind him, warning alarms flashed red. "If anyone finds this message," the man whispered shakily, "leave this planet immediately." Static interrupted the recording. Then the astronaut looked behind him fearfully. "We thought we were alone," he continued. "But something lives beneath Mars. Something ancient." Marcus swallowed nervously. The astronaut on the screen continued speaking. "It learns from us. It copies our voices, our memories, our fears." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the abandoned station. Everyone jumped. The lights flickered violently. Then, the video ended. Darkness swallowed the room. Something moved in the hallway. Fast. Ethan quickly aimed his flashlight toward the corridor. For one brief second, he saw a figure standing there. Tall, thin, human-shaped. But its face looked wrong, like shifting shadows trying to imitate a person. Then, it vanished. Marcus panicked. "We need to leave, right now." The crew ran back toward the rover. Behind them, metallic footsteps echoed through the dark tunnels. Something was following them. They escaped moments before a violent dust explosion collapsed part of the underground station. Back at their research base, fear spread quickly. Nobody slept that night. Outside the windows, Mars looked darker than ever. Then came the whisper. Soft, quiet, almost impossible to hear. "Ethan." Ethan froze instantly. The voice came from outside the station. Marcus slowly looked toward him. "You heard that too?" Then the voice returned. "Ethan, help me." It sounded exactly like Ethan's dead brother. The commander's face turned pale. "No," he whispered. Lena moved slowly toward the security monitor. Outside the station stood a figure wearing an old spacesuit. Motionless, covered in red dust. The figure slowly lifted one hand, then pointed toward the darkness beyond the hills. Marcus backed away immediately. "We are not opening that door." But Ethan could not stop staring at the figure. The pain inside his chest returned stronger than ever. For years, he blamed himself for his brother's death, and now Mars was somehow using that pain against him. The figure vanished moments later, but the whispering continued throughout the night. The next morning, a giant dust storm approached the station. The sky turned dark orange. Powerful winds screamed across the planet. Mission Control warned them that if the storm damaged the launch systems, they could become trapped on Mars forever. But before leaving, Ethan made a dangerous decision. He wanted answers. Following the mysterious signals, the astronauts traveled once more toward the canyon. This time, they discovered something hidden beneath the old station. A tunnel. Ancient. Deep underground. The deeper they walked, the colder the air became. Strange symbols covered the walls. Not human symbols. The flashlight beam shook while distant whispers echoed through the darkness. Then they reached a massive underground chamber.
At the center stood a giant black structure. Smooth. Perfect.
Impossible. It looked older than civilization itself. Suddenly, Marcus heard his daughter crying. "Daddy!" He turned instantly. Nobody stood there. But the voice continued. Soft. Crying. Marcus nearly broke down emotionally. "That's her voice," he whispered. Lena stared at the black structure in horror. "It's inside our minds." The chamber began shaking. Dark shapes slowly moved beneath the walls.
Creatures made from shadow, not fully alive, not fully human, watching silently. Ethan suddenly understood the truth. The entity beneath Mars was not simply attacking people. It was feeding on loneliness, fear, regret, pain, everything humans tried to hide deep inside themselves. The shadows around Ethan slowly transformed. Now he saw his younger brother standing before him, alive,
smiling sadly. "You left me," the figure whispered. Ethan froze. Tears filled his eyes. For one painful second, he wanted to believe it was real. But then Lena grabbed his arm. "It's lying to you," she shouted. The chamber trembled violently. The shadows moved closer. Marcus screamed as dark hands reached toward him. The astronauts ran desperately through the collapsing tunnel. Behind them, the whispers became louder, angrier, almost desperate. Back inside the rover, nobody spoke for several minutes.
Finally, Lena whispered, "I don't think it's evil." Marcus stared at her. "Are you insane?" Lena shook her head slowly. "I think it's lonely." The words stayed inside Ethan's mind. Lonely. Maybe that ancient thing beneath Mars had been alone for millions of years. Maybe it copied human emotions because it desperately wanted connection. But it did not understand humanity. It only understood pain. The dust storm reached the station that night. The entire base shook violently.
Warning alarms screamed through the halls. Their launch window was closing. If they did not leave immediately, they would die on Mars. As the astronauts prepared the escape ship, the whispers returned one final time. Soft, broken, sad. "Don't leave." Ethan stopped moving. For the first time, he no longer felt fear, only sadness. He looked toward the dark red horizon outside. Then quietly, he whispered, "We're all lonely sometimes." The whispering suddenly stopped. Complete silence filled the station. Moments later, the astronauts launched into the sky while the giant storm consumed Mars beneath them. As the ship rose above the planet, Ethan looked down one final time. For a brief second, he saw thousands of shadow-like figures standing silently across the surface, watching them leave. Then the storm swallowed everything. The journey home felt different. The crew talked more, laughed more, sometimes cried openly. Mars had changed them, because the scariest thing they discovered on another planet was not monsters. It was the darkness humans carry inside themselves.
Fear, regret, isolation, pain. But they also learned something beautiful. People survive darkness by facing it together. Months later, the astronauts finally returned to Earth. The world celebrated their survival. News stations called the mission humanity's greatest achievement.
But Ethan rarely spoke publicly about what really happened on Mars. Most people would never believe him anyway. Still, late at night, he sometimes stared at the stars again from the roof of his apartment building. The universe no longer looked peaceful. It looked mysterious, alive, and somewhere far away in the darkness, beneath the red storms of Mars, Ethan believed something ancient was still waiting, listening, dreaming, lonely.
The universe is filled with mysteries. Some exist in deep space, others exist inside the human heart. Fear, loneliness, regret. These invisible shadows follow us everywhere, even to another planet. The astronauts survived Mars not because they were fearless, but because they finally faced the truth inside themselves. And maybe that is the greatest lesson of all. Courage is not living without fear. Courage is continuing forward, even when fear walks beside you. Sometimes the darkest places reveal the brightest truths, and sometimes the greatest discovery in the universe is simply learning that nobody should face life alone. If this story pulled you deep into the mysteries of space, remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves emotional sci-fi adventures. And remember this, the universe may be endless, but even in the darkest corners of space, hope still exists. See you in the next story.